Hi everyone, this is Teresa Gonzalez with Latinas from the Block to the Boardroom. Thank you for liking and subscribing to us on your favorite podcast platform. As always, we're always looking for your feedback and comments on our website at latinasb2b.com. Get ready for the Juvenile Justice Reform Podcast with Rosie Arroyo. Welcome back, everyone. Just a quick recap from our last episode, Serving the Tea on Tech. We had discussed some inequity in tech and how wage workers and contractors needed to be hired as full-time for their full-time work and not getting benefits. And that means health and just insurance and Social Security. The AB5 bill, which is a huge workers' rights bill that was started in the California Senate, was passed. So that is a huge, huge accomplishment for community coming together, rallying behind everyone and saying, we're not taking the exploitation anymore. And this was all started by this chingona who is Lorena Gonzalez, who is a Democrat from San Diego. So there was another woman named Maria Elena Dorazo. She is a Democrat from Los Angeles that worked with Lorena on this. So we're talking about two badass chingonas that had passed. They co-authored this bill, got people to rally around it, which puts all the big tech companies, Uber, Lyft, and Amazon, we're talking Apple, Google, and hello, Facebook, that the contract working situation is going to change. So I want to just give a big 2 snaps for those women and leading the charge in putting the workers' advocacy and rights forward. And it was passed yesterday by the governor, Gavin Newsom, who used to be a mayor here in San Francisco in the Bay Area. And just to kind of quickly say that Uber and Lyft will start fighting this bill in an appeal, and they're putting more than $60 million into this initiative to reverse this bill, just so they don't have to pay for insurance and employment benefits for full-time workers. So it's still to keep them richer and the workers, without any security or benefits. So let's just keep on working. And I'm very thankful for Lorena and also the work that she's done with Maria in California. So big up. We still got more work to do, folks, in our communities. And I said work, yes. But you guys are all on your phones and you can use your voice. You can use your phones, tweets. Y'all with your tweets, man, you can take people down, as I've seen in the Twitter feeds. So let's just keep working with Latinx Tech and the Workers' Rights Coalitions to start talking about how we're going to hold tech companies accountable for equity in wages and security benefits. All right. So here is to my podcast and working in the community and having guest speakers. And so with that, I'm going to bring in another chingona. She's from the East Coast, and I met her through a wonderful woman named Nora at the Podcast Movement. And we were talking about social rights and community equity for people of color, and she introduced me to Rosie Arroyo. And so I talked with Rosie a little bit about what she's doing in the juvenile justice transformation on a policy level that works with states in the law enforcement arenas that will help to hopefully transition less youth and youth of color being incarcerated in a lot of states. So, one thing I want to say is, what's the deal with law enforcement on school campuses, especially in communities of color? I mean, I just seriously want to know, not for nothing, but it's white male teens that seem to be just popping off with their daddy's AKs and firearms at schools. And, whenever I speak of these shootings with people and why are they not held to the standard of, we're talking youth in their high schools or in junior high, they're being incarcerated for. I want you to elaborate on this, Rosie, but, if a Mexican child or a Black child were to come up into a school like Neo from the Matrix with, just loaded down with guns, folks would just, because they're mad or upset or depressed or whatever it is. I mean, there would just be a serious revolt. But nobody's revolting in the way that we can. We're trying to do gun reform and get the law enforcement, presence out of the schools. But what else is it going to take? And that's why I have Rosie here on this podcast with me today. So, Rosie, you want to tell us a little bit about your start in the community, how you started working with law enforcement, and we'll just take it from there.
Yes, of course. So 6 years ago, I started working inadvertently in the field of youth justice reform and overall just creating more opportunities for families in the community to succeed. So just advocating for families, but then focusing on justice reform efforts. And in the beginning, I really didn't understand the extent of the work that needed to be done. So it took me about 3 years to really get and understand my community, what they needed, what they were looking for, but then also getting to know the stakeholders and by stakeholders, I mean law enforcement, prosecutors, public defenders, teachers, superintendents, judges, and the like, anybody, a family, a mom, a dad, a grandmother raising their children, their grandchildren. And it took a lot of time to really understand at all levels what everybody was seeing from their viewpoint, right?
Right.
And this work led to other things because ultimately we all want to live in communities that are safe and healthy and help us thrive and become successful so that we can all raise our own families, right?
Right.
But how often is that opportunity allowed to some of us that might not have the background or socioeconomic status that some others have, right? Like if you just don't happen to have that resilient gene that can bypass all the trauma without having to really dig deep into and heal from it,
right?
Then we're kind of stuck in this place where we might end up in kind of a circle or a generational place that we have that continues to perpetrate this whole justice involved, system involvement, lifestyle.
Right.
And not that that's something that you purposely seek to get, but when you're surrounded by all these risks in the community and gun violence and poverty and substance use, or even in more affluent communities with substance abuse, domestic violence, all these affect the way a youth and their children grow up. So it's all related, right? Like everybody's at the table for a reason. Everybody from the teacher in your classroom to the person down the street that owns the pizza store. You know what I mean? Like
Absolutely.
Your neighborhood is who is going to be raising you ultimately. So after learning all of that, like then I realized, like, well, what's pointing us in this direction of what we need to do? So of course the role that I have, a lot of it's based on, reviewing and analyzing data and making sure we can assess needs based on, the numbers that we're seeing, the data, like the amount of youth arrests, the amount of domestic violence incidents, the amount of kids receiving free lunch in school, the amount of families on, benefits and things like that. So you take all this information and you kind of pinpoint, okay, so these specific communities have these highest numbers in these areas. So what does that mean? That means they have so much more to fight against, all these brick walls in front of them,
right,
to be successful. And, and ultimately with all these things in the way, and as you're growing up in adolescent brain development, you might get bogged down by all that stuff and just being a child and teenager and growing up and being a teenager. You know what I mean? You make funny and silly decisions all the time. And that's all just what it is to be a teenager. Like if we all look back, we could see, oh, I didn't always make the right choices, but then we weren't all put in jail or in detention or anything because of those choices. So like everything's related. I just think people might kind of push away from that because it's like, oh, that's just, that doesn't happen here, or this doesn't happen here. And it's just really recognizing what's happening in our communities and being aware enough to want to do something about it.
Right. So I think just referencing back to the last podcast that we talked about, and we do talk about the systemic, poverty and economic inequality that happens in communities of color that are systemic, that actually lead to this type of these types of scenarios, right? Kids want to join gangs, they start to, not want to go to school, or they just go to school, but they're not engaged. And, this is all from economics and opportunities in the job sector that really affect families, right, of color. And when we're, when the living wage, or where it costs to live keeps going up, but the wages keep going down, it puts a lot of stress. It's stress on the family, it's stress on the kids. So I think in the lower income communities, and this is statewide, there is a higher level of, kids that are just being, I want to say, they fall through the cracks, right? My husband is in education. He's been over here in West Contra Costa. I'm on a board called the Calculus Roundtable, where we do STEM initiatives, and we try to find money so that we keep kids engaged, or we try to find new teaching methods that will enable kids to stay and be in school. Because I think, as you and I discussed previously, this is a space for some of these kids where they just get their first meal of the day, or this is their safe place because, the shit at home is really intense, or, grandma is not there, or, a lot of their extended families, which we've talked about as well, are displaced, or there's other family members, and it's really hard. And you talk about the trauma that's embedded, and how do we get over it? So yes, there's these brick walls, there's the brick walls, there's the moats, there's everything we have to do. So when you succeed, it is truly an accomplishment, and it was a focus. Somebody gave you an opportunity. So I just want to emphasize how important. For me, I'm always shocked by the law enforcement presence that are in these schools, because I think it really perpetrates that cradle to pipeline metaphor, right? Because we're already creating that. You're being profiled, and you're already being, you go to juvenile hall, and then from there, most of them, when they come out, they end up doing something else, and then they go to prison. So it's almost like they don't have a running start to get out there and try, because they're so lacking in all the other, extended sphere of influence for them to grasp onto. So talking about that and what you're doing in policy advocacy with law enforcement, I mean, how do you navigate that? How do you get their ear? And how do you make, that institution say, hey, back the up, back the truck up, you know what I mean? It's like, you don't need that type of presence. What is it that you do? Because I think this is a discussion where we can say, how do we bring other people together to say, this is the template for justice reform for communities of color in the juvenile, K through 8 or high school level, so that there is a fighting chance for them to excel and to exceed and to be engaged?
So I think a lot of when I started, so I can say about 3 years ago, when I officially really focused on law enforcement. So the juvenile justice system has various components, and depending on the state you're in, it varies. Like different states have their justice system, their youth justice system, under different branches and government entities and things like that. And New Jersey's set up in a way where we actually have a juvenile justice commission that houses youth that get adjudicated delinquent and sentenced to our training school, which is Jamesburg or the girls' Hayes side. So that's the very tail end, right? Like, what I try to do is focus on doing as many blocks to get to that area, right? And all of this involves partnerships. But
you do a little ninja work to like not
yeah,
get them there. You're like,
yeah, you
hey,
have to like,
you got to
what
do.
magic can happen?
You get out your martial arts like law, like, hey, look this way. No, there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what? Funny you say that. So just keep that on the side, martial arts. Okay,
Yeah.
we'll go back to that because it's all involved. So the New Jersey is set up that legislatively there's these things called Youth Services Commission, and each county houses a Youth Services Commission. And these commissions are responsible for developing programs that provide preventative and supportive services to youth that are either at risk or system involved, right? So already we're kind of ahead of the game where we already have these dollars focused on this area, right? So what do? You have this money that's focused in these areas, and now you have individuals responsible for making sure that there's these things that happen. So when I took on the role, again, I said I really didn't understand the full extent of what this was going to be. So 3 years ago, when I started really working at a deeper level, when I finally analyzed our county on a large level, I focused on 7 different communities in the county, and these communities just had higher risk factors. And to be honest with you, we have urban cities in that, and then suburban communities in the 7, right? But based on different risk factors that were identified, and the demographics and the amount of youth, overall population, things like that. And they vary from small to large. So these 7 communities, I was like, well, if we're going to do this, we're going to have to start talking to different community partners there. So I took time to speak.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt, but what do you consider community partners in that aspect?
Oh, just like people who, churches, if there's different civic organizations, nonprofit organizations, families, and then prosecutors and teachers, just individuals that might be living or in the community that are knowledgeable about engagement and what they've seen in the past and where they see things going. So, you have to take that all in, right? Because you can't. Here, I never had the opportunity to ever engage law enforcement besides the fact if I ever got pulled over, and things like that. Like, it was just, you just don't think that you could sit down and have a conversation with a police officer and it just be like about how's it going, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I mean when you're a person of color, and when you're a person of significant color, and we're talking, not light skinned or white, it is a scary moment, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I have to acknowledge that as a white Latina. I have to know that there's a difference in when I'm approached by law enforcement or I'm approaching law enforcement. It could be viewed differently, right? So I'm not saying that everybody reacts that way. It's just a possibility. So gathering all this information, having discussions, I really didn't have a roadmap on how to engage law enforcement. So my first tactic was send an email to the police chief in the community and the school in that community and their township council and ask them to meet with me regarding their community. And so several of them took me up on the offer. And the first one, we make a joke of it now, but 3 years ago, I sit at the table real serious, right? Because, I also joke about law enforcement. Like, they never, like, when I first was introducing myself to them, they don't smile. They're just like very like stern looking.
Intimidation, with the presence.
Yeah, and they're trained that way, and that's I understand that. But here I am, like, smiling and joking, and like, I'm getting nowhere, man. There's like crickets. So again, 3 years ago, I show up with folders of data, talk about everything, talk about the possibilities. Now that you know all this that I'm sharing with you, here's where we could go with this. Like, this is exactly telling us, where to focus on. Maybe your community needs more early childhood preventative services. So do we do more after school programs that incorporate like ballet, karate classes, boxing, things like that? Or do we need more tutoring, And so how do we build that in your community with a partnership with everybody at the table? And now 3 years later, they're like, are you still watching us? How are we doing? You know what I mean? And so it's like, it's gotten to a point where it's like we kind of brainstorm on how to be more effective in the community as law enforcement. To really, they've engaged and they've enhanced the way they work with youth by being more trauma informed. They slow down, I guess, their process in assessing and take the time to help divert kids from the juvenile justice system. So I don't have the exact number off the top of my head, but I know we've reduced the amount of arrests from 2017 to 2018 by almost 27%, which is a huge deal, right? So like our police departments are utilizing diversionary tactics. So like overall we've reduced this, but we also still have overrepresentation of minority youth in the system.
Exactly. Which is why I bring up the whole fact of white male teens and just white males in general going ballistic, no pun intended there, about a gun bullet, but
yeah, you know what?
There is a high percentage of them, and the justice system, when we talk about them from high school level that show this type of aggression in school, and that is not dealt with, but yet this is my rub to the whole thing. And I appreciate all the things you're doing because I want this to change, because it really stunts the community growth and the prosperity of communities really coming together. Is, that there is this injustice of profiling, and it creates a lot of anger. And, how can we, not be angry when this is happening? And since the elections of Trump, it has been a higher percentage, and there is no decrease of police profiling of people of color. In fact, it's gotten a lot worse. And I just think that kids, when they see this, right, and we talked about this, is that they see it on social media, they see it on TV, they hear it from their friends, and it's also in their schools. So they're starting to say, hey, they know, and they see these other kids that are rising up and saying, we're not going to take this shit anymore. And I love how this generation is really going to change things, but they need the tools and the skills, and they need to understand how to organize, which is why I have you on this podcast, so we understand how to organize, how to align ourselves, and to have the information and the necessary, tools to come to the table and be, that I want to say mind ninja, to say, hey, you can't say this because I have data to back it up. This is what's been happening. And to really go, I want to say mano a mano with the data, right? Because they are not standing down, and nobody should be standing down about this. So I really want to, this isn't to say, oh, we're hopeless, we can't do this. It is about how you come together, how you organize, how we can, create unity, and how you bring the community together to really stand up and have the conversation at the table that you're talking about, right? Because it's very important. And this generation of Gen X and the millennials that are coming in, they're really changing the narrative. But I think that they don't have the history and the experience that, a lot of us have had, or that we've seen from our parents, in the 60s and the 70s, all during all that turmoil, what it meant to organize and bring communities together. We need that foundation again. So I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No,
but
I think you bring it when after Parkland. I think everybody's reaction was like immediate, like this reactionary thing, which we have a history of either after devastating effects and events in our country, we either really band together. The beautiful example of 9/11, how we band together after that to really support each other. We were like, you know what I mean?
Yes.
How communities literally loved each other and supported each other. After Parkland, I think families and communities really wanted to feel safe again and have their children feel safe. And like, what do you do? What's your first thing when you think of safety? Public safety.
Right.
Law enforcement. So law enforcement was going to at least put a Band-Aid on, how I viewed it. personally. They were going to put a Band-Aid on this larger issue on how to deal with school climate and issues that evolve into these school events. But in reality, if you're not, like, I have experienced really awesome school resource officers, right? We developed a program in one of our communities, and it's after school gaming program, right? So a good example is one of the kids in the school was, kind of a loner, didn't really talk to anybody. And then always up and down the halls, like, he just really didn't have that many friends. We start this program, I funded the police department $2,500. And with the $2,500, they did this whole gaming thing, right? Like they also, put funds into it too, because $2,500 wasn't going to get you much. But they put like 4 gaming stations, all types of like just board games, Uno. Apparently these kids are obsessed with Uno. And the school resource officer just makes it a point to hang out with them after school with this program. Well, let me tell you, that kid went to that program the first day it opened, took his headphones off, and talked to 4 other kids. And I know that doesn't seem like a lot, but let me tell you, like in that kid's life, that's huge. That kid then later helped bring out another kid that was experiencing some really traumatic stuff in his life out of his shell, and sat there and befriended him. And then like you have a room full, in any given day there's anywhere between 15 and 40 kids depending after school. And we just started this in like maybe January of this year. And you'll have everywhere from anyone from football players to like, more reserved artists or things like that, like quiet, not more introverted, and like they're engaging and they're, joking around with the SRO, the school resource officer. And then the guidance counselor comes in and checks in, right? Hey guys, how are you doing? What's going on? Does anybody need help with homework? Are you guys good? Does anybody want a snack? And then kids go home like after school, like around maybe 4:30 or the late bus. Now, I know that doesn't seem like a lot, right? But that's just like a good example of what a good SRO can do, right? Just instead of looking at things in a negative standpoint, they're always looking for the best in somebody, and they're there more as support. Now, some SROs don't do that, right? And I guess it depends on their training and their mindset and things like that. I've just honestly been in a community that our school resource officers are extremely compassionate, and we have really progressive chiefs of police where that nonsense isn't tolerated.
Right.
And that's not everywhere, and that's not everybody.
Exactly.
But bringing that conversation to even get to that, to even be able to start a program after school, that wasn't easy. Like, it's not easy to engage and tell a police officer who's been trained for public safety to be like, we need you to be able to provide youth opportunities to grow and be successful, and not push for charging immediately. Not look at issues in school as school issues and help mediate versus arresting and charging and then putting them in the system.
Right.
And I think that shift has happened, at least locally here in our county, and on a statewide level, we have some really progressive police departments that are going that route. I mean, and that's just one example. But I think people thought it was going to be the safest, easiest thing to do, when in reality, what we should have been doing is focusing on mental health supports in these communities.
Exactly.
Like really, like what was the crisis intervention for that for those kids?
Right.
Where was it? It was missing.
Right.
Like, and if you don't know the resources, if all those signs were there, then we also have to own that.
Right.
That we missed something, and not own it to feel guilty, but own it to heal and move forward and fix it.
Exactly. Yep.
And we can't, and we're stuck. It's like yes, we need gun reform, and yes, we need changes at policy levels and the way school security is handled. But when you're asking a teacher to do 8 million things and be a social worker and feed the kid in class, maybe because he forgot his lunch money, and help them with their homework. I mean, when are they going to just be a teacher?
Exactly.
Right?
Oh, no,
Like,
you don't have to explain it to me. My husband is, he's moved out of the classroom and he has moved into the administrative realm because I mentioned to him that's where you can have the most influence, because there is a lot of, I want to call the old guard, that they're going to retire, and the new ideas and systems and all the young people that come through in the education system are really going to make an impact. And the system has to change too. But I want to go back to the juvenile justice system and how we talk about, the law enforcement presence there. And when we talk about that, and you're talking about how the police system or the police or the law enforcement are really there to, and I might be mistaken saying this, to advocate for communities and to really assure that they're safe in your region. But there is a lot of distrust still, and it has been for years, and that's going to take a lot of unpacking with communities of color.
Yeah.
It's going to take years. But I think as our community heals and law enforcement, I think they have to unpack their shit, and they don't want to do that because of I feel like it's a power structure that is ingrained and goes into it. And I know there's a lot of good, folks out there, but it only takes those bad ones to really, really get blown up and just, in the media to say, here's what happens.
Yeah.
And I think that when the community comes together to heal, and the police are educating themselves to unpack their biases and their institutional colonizations of people of color and how they view people of color, and everybody's working on their stuff, I think that's when the change is really going to happen. But we are not going to get there. I just feel like the police presence in the school needs to come out. That's my personal opinion. And I know that I don't even know why it's there, to be quite honest. I really don't know why it's even there. I mean, is it to protect the teachers? Is it I still want to understand why that presence is there. And it's going to take a long time. Like the prison system itself, it's a business. It is a business. And, business does not continue to grow unless you have customers. So if there's more customers and the customers keep buying, or there's more customers being pushed through the system, that business is never going to die. And I feel like, the business development, I'm taking it to a business level here. The business development reps are the police enforcement, in school. Like, hey, how do we turn this around? It's like, get them out, it's like, I know there's good cops out there. I'm just saying that the police force in these communities of color, when they're already downtrodden, there's a lot of economic, burden and inequity. The families are disrupted. There's so much going on. If you could just take that one element out, I mean, I almost feel like it's like we cannot take care of ourselves.
I think like we, at some point as a community, we have to own some of it too, in the sense that if we want change, we have to make sure we like embody that change that we want to happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like, I knew there was something that was missing at multiple levels in communities I didn't live in, but were in my local area. So I made it a point to get to know exactly what that community was, who they are, and then get to know again, the police department. And then honestly, like you need a consistent person in your community that's going to sit there and have these conversations,
right?
And know how to de-escalate heated conversations so it's healing. So in essence, I was probably doing restorative discussions when I was introducing myself to these police departments, because I was in a community, like an advocate in the community,
mm-hmm.
having these conversations that were super official, and here are some next steps. I think what I learned is having consistency, being able to bring community and law enforcement together in safe spaces to have these conversations, right? and then report back to each one on changes we each want to make, right? Like changes we want to see and changes we want to make.
Right.
And then just be honest with what's a possibility, right?
Right.
So with being honest comes, here's what the legislation or policy tells us we're allowed to do, right? Or we can do, or what we're like kind of stuck in between.
Right.
Here's what we're able to do within that. But then knowing that this is what we can do within something, here are these areas that we can change something and push for new legislation or amendments to different bills.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's like, but you don't get there unless someone's willing to dive deep into having these conversations,
right,
as uncomfortable as they are. Honestly, I think these youth coming up are going to change the game. Like, at this point, I'm 36 years old, and I'm hoping that I get to be around someone up and coming, so then I could educate them and give them all of the knowledge that I have, so that they can keep it moving forward. Because at some point, like, my viewpoint is going to be skewed, because as I get older, I'm going to react differently to things.
Right.
And I don't want that to affect the beauty that comes with change.
Yeah, change is hard. I get that. And that's why, these podcasts that I have created are regarding intergenerational conversations, because we have to connect and link hands on history of sharing knowledge and how we can change our community and what we can unpack, knowing what we know by experience, being in the situation that we have been in, and how we want to create reform and change. So just real quick, Rosie, I love this discussion. What is the difference? Can you explain to some of our listeners out there, what do you think is, I have two questions, but the first part is, what is the difference between restorative justice and juvenile justice reform in communities of color? Mm-hmm.
So if you're just focusing on juvenile justice reform, it could be basic policies that don't incorporate community involvement or community aspects, right? So if you're just reforming the system, that could just be like you're changing a policy to update it because it's outdated on something. There's a shift in this. It could be something completely unrelated to community. When you speak on restorative justice practices, you speak on healing the community, bringing people together in like these types of healing circles that allow for law enforcement to trust the community to heal itself and mediate the situation, right? And it could even include law enforcement at the table. Hey, if you're on probation, you can include probation at the table. All the parties involved in the situation, and you literally create a healing circle, right? And then you have a mediator or a counselor or whoever takes the lead to hash out the situation and you heal. And so then you're restoring a peace in a community. You reconcile with everything, and then you're able to move forward, right? And so you have people that, there's beautiful models across the U.S. on this, on restorative justice and healing circles and these centers where, like, we just heal the community instead. Restorative justice is based on trauma-informed practices. They're welcoming locations or community members, and it's all about like reconciling with the situation and healing your community versus just policy change, right? Because restorative justice in and of itself is not just policy change, but it's a mindset change.
Right.
Someone I know always says you're changing hearts and minds, right? Like, so you're literally changing the way a person views the community once you heal together.
Yeah, and that's deep. So, and that's why I want to take it back to the conversation or the point that I made that, in that restorative healing, and when you have a healing circle, the presence of who is your perpetrator or who you do not feel safe with, or that there is an antitrust, I feel that breaks the circle of healing, and you cannot have that in. But there are also people that probably bring that in. But everybody, I think, there has to be respect and peace on that healing aspect. And I just feel the police or the law enforcement if they want to have their healing circle, they need to, like I said, they need to unpack their own stuff in their own way. And I know you're saying bring them into the circle to engage in the conversation of how do we reform communities and bring it full circle so that we can move together. I don't know if that will ever, happen unless we're like, some of the European countries where they don't carry guns and they're just about, everybody understands the social equity and the care of the nation as a whole together. I mean, some nations in Europe, I've been to Europe a few times, they are not like that. But there are other, world entities that, there is a lot of, healing and restorative justice. And, this country really has been built on oppression and how, there is a lot of work to be done. And we are the youngest nation, with the biggest cojones out there. And, that's really awesome. But at the same time, it is built on the backs of people of color. And I feel like the incarceration and you're bringing in the law enforcement at a young level without unpacking or why there is a reason. And you have white males that are going out there and there is not the same justice being restored in the communities of an equilibrium. It's really hard for everyone to come together at the table. And I want to commend you for bringing that, I want to say, olive branch into your area and how you have been able to do that and restore that piece of your community because other big states have a long way to go. California is one of them. And I just really feel that, hearing your voice and what you can do and how we want to get a seat at the table and how we can amend the communities in healing together in a restorative justice, but also doing it at a policy level is really going to bring some dynamic change on an economic level. And for me, I'm always wanting to build communities up on an economic level because I came from, I've said in the previous early on recordings, I came from, there's a community in Fresno called the West Side. And, it's like back in the day, it was these were where Mexican Americans and the African Americans lived, but it was after the GI Bill and, everybody had a home and everybody had a car and everybody could go to school. And it was kind of like that, after the World War II. But then it just sank. And LA is the same way. And, out here in Richmond, after Rosie the Riveter, there's a whole story and there's a national park over here that has the same information on the communities have all given their part in this American system, in the justice system. We have all wanted to be a part of this. We are a part of this country. But when we see the presence of how we're being militarized in schools, in the justice system, and how we want to reform that, it takes a lot of knowledge to bring, as you do, data, the conversation. You don't stand down. You bring your presence and you really go toe to toe. And you also keep those kids out of there by saying, hey, here's how we can work together. And this is not right for them to go. So I want to really just applaud you and Nura for bringing us together on that. And I wanted to also ask you, I have one last question for you.
Uh-huh. I think this overall, I don't know if this is where I initially intended to take my life in the direction of working in this field, but I know it's become more than a job, and I think it's just part of me now.
Mm-hmm.
And last year, just being in the amazing presence of Dolores Huerta.
I love her. Yes.
I almost passed out. But I was in a really tough place because I felt like, man, it's been how many years and I keep having the same conversation and why aren't they using this diversionary resource or why is this happening? You know what I mean?
Yes.
And I get bogged down. And then I remember I have to be patient. And I'm sitting in there and she's literally right in front of me and she's speaking on, how you can't give up, how you find every way. If
Yes.
one way doesn't work, this way will work. If that
Yes.
way doesn't work, you go the other way. And
Mm-hmm.
and what I realized is, in my metaphor, like in how I see it, it's like, my family comes from housing development. My dad's in construction, my entire family. And, like, if I find, like, if there's a hole if the door closes in front of my face, I'm gonna bang on the door. If no one opens, then I'm gonna take a hammer to that door. And if not, then I'm gonna find a window. And if that window's shut, I'm gonna crack that window open and find a way in to be in this conversation.
Right.
Right. So, like, and she did that. And how perfect timing was it that I'm in this rut and she's like in front of me, like all of her glorious so many years of age and
Right.
still fighting the fight. Like, and here, and I was tired at 35, exhausted
Right.
from
And she's
having this conversation.
today, she is
And then
89 years old,
yeah,
touring, speaking and saying, Si se puede, don't give up.
yes,
Come on, you can do it. I mean, if that's any goal for
yeah,
anybody.
and she hit me hard because part of her conversation was talking about school reform and juvenile
Mm-hmm.
justice
Mm-hmm.
and school to prison pipeline, and then I was like, it was meant for me to see her tonight. It was meant for me to be here because, like, I'm recharged, right? So,
Yes.
like, it might not seem, I like to be in the behind the scenes, right? I will
Yeah.
uplift everybody and anybody that is out there doing amazing stuff. And I love to be able to empower them to do even more amazing things.
Awesome. Yeah. No, I mean, she is the most amazing woman. And if nobody has seen her movie, Dolores, and you're like, I keep hearing about this woman and I know about her and she's, an activist, you need to see that movie. Everybody needs to see that movie because she changed the way food comes to your table. Okay. How all the vegetables and all the fruit that comes to your table from California, which is the 5th largest global industry in agriculture.
Yeah, I always explain, like, I'm always prepared for this argument, right? Like, when people bring up immigration reform and undocumented individuals, it like burns me up, right? Because here I am, I'm first generation, right? My parents came over from Mexico, beautiful, amazing, hardworking people that helped me be who I am, right? My dad built the homes that you live in. My
Right.
dad built the shopping malls that you shop in, the restaurants you eat in, the businesses that you work in. My grandmother put food on your table with the vegetables that she picked in the fields. Like, my family helped you have yours.
Yes.
Right? And so I, like, again, being able to have all of this and everything that we do, we have to continue to seek justice, no matter what it is, whether it's justice reform, social justice, education reform, migrant worker rights, and women's rights, and everything. We have to make sure that we seek true justice, and seeking true justice, we have to reconcile with all the negative that's happened and try to survive from the traumas and move forward to change and not remember our history and how it hurt, but allow that hurt to push you to change something.
Yeah.
Like, and I think that is my constant reminder when I'm in these communities and I'm hearing our parents and our grandparents tell me about their children in the juvenile justice system, or when I get to work with the adults coming back from incarceration saying, I've been locked up for 33 years, nothing in this community is re-entering because it all is new to me.
Right.
This is new, new entry. So we started a group called New Entry Opportunity Specialists that help previously incarcerated adults just network and be and change policy and change stigma in our community.
Yep.
Like, all you have to do is sit down and have a conversation with somebody. And and I understand the fact that I look white is a big deal, and it makes it easier because the conversation is going to be easier. But for me, right? So it's going to take a lot more work for somebody else that doesn't look like me. And I have to respect that. But I also will be there right next to them, right behind them, if they want to have that conversation. Heck, if someone wants to call me from Texas and tell me like they're about to have this conversation, can I be on mute in your phone in my pocket or in their pocket while they talk to them? I will do that for them.
Right.
Just because I want them to have somebody to lean on, because these topics aren't easy to talk about.
Nope, they sure aren't. So out here in California, there is an organization called Homeboy Industries.
Yes.
You know about them?
Oh my God. Can I just go and be there with them forever?
Yes.
They are absolutely amazing.
They are. They're based out of Los Angeles, California. If nobody knows about them, homeboyindustries.org. They are amazing, and it really works. We're talking about, the incarcerated or gang members that want to be, part of community and building an enterprise, and how they've been able to heal and do all these wonderful things. They just are healing the community, but they're also building businesses, which is awesome. So if you know about them, I mean, this could be a whole other, podcast in itself. So I have a question. I mean, is that true, or am I stating non-facts here for you, Rosie?
No, I feel like in order for us to make something happen, we have to be loud and be present.
Be loud. Yep. And I love that you know them. So that's great. But that means that our communities are coming closer and closer together. Yes. So on this note, and I mean, you've given me a lot of information, and I really appreciate it. And I love hearing these stories about women that are changing things. I know there's some, hombres out there that are also doing that. And we will also have them on this show talking about what they're doing in their communities. But that's another podcast as well.
Yeah, and I want everybody to be that, right? And be okay with who they are and how if they advocate silently through social media and not in person, then guess what? You are our Twitter town hall lead. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like I just feel as long as you're consistent and genuine and true to you and who you want to be and who you want to affect and impact, why am I here? Why do I want to do this? Give me that reason. Yeah. And then I can figure out what my what is.
Yep. So, Rosie, I just want to thank you for today and giving me your time. I want to thank Nura for bringing us together and sharing this information. And I'm giving you a big hug from across the states here to the East Coast.
Thanks, Vanessa. I so appreciate you and your team. And Nura is beautiful. So
yes, she is. Maybe we'll be a guest on her podcast one day.